afternoon. And thanks so much for joining us. My name is Kirsten Freskin. I am a Senior Program Associate with the Center for Children and Family Futures. And I am here with my colleague, Will Blakely. Will?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Will Blakely, and I am a Program Associate with Children and Family Futures, and I'm very excited to join you. Thank you for having us. Judge McGinnis?
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. I'm excited to be here, and thanks to TLPI for hosting us. I'm Kim McGinnis. I'm the judge for the Pueblo Poake, which is located in northern New Mexico, just north of Santa Fe, and we've been running our adult healing to wellness court since 2015.
Thanks. Next slide, please. Will and I are coming to you from the Center for Children and Family Futures, and our work is funded by the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. We thank them for our continued support to do this work, to have these conversations with, to partner with the Tribal Law and Policy Institute, to have these conversations not just about family treatment court or juvenile delinquency or juvenile healing to wellness court, but also to expand these conversations out to adult criminal healing to wellness courts. And so we're really just sort of excited today to be in dialogue with you a little bit about this work, about this shift. We're going to encourage that you talk with us in the chat and each other. But I will say that the work that we are sharing is that of the Center for Children and Family Futures and not that of the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. Next, please. So these are our learning objectives, but I want to make it even more broad. And that is that I hope by the end of this session today that whatever kind of healing to wellness court you work with, that you will walk away with sort of a belief and understanding that we really are talking about a family-centered approach in working with our participants. And that when we make this shift to being more family-centered, to recognizing that our participants recover in community, recover within their family systems, that we will really have much better outcomes, not just for that adult, but for their children, for their partners, and really work on healing that family system. And we also want you to walk away with some really practical strategies, things that you will be able to implement, questions to go back and ask when you're working with your team. So that's our goal today. Next. Judge, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you. So when Kirsten and Will first asked me to participate in this session, my reaction was, no, we're terrible at being family focused. And then I had a longer discussion with them and realized, that we're on a journey. And so I'm not trying to present myself as an expert in this, or that our court has fully conquered this family focused perspective, because we're really on a journey. And I think the inspiration is to just think about how you can start that journey. As what Kirsten was saying, is just a small practical things you can do without any additional funding. So our Milwaukee's journey began almost immediately after we started our adult criminal healing to wellness court, because of course we were dealing with lots of folks who had children. And over the years, we had partnered with local agencies to do Circle of Security parenting as part of our healing to wellness court requirements in before they completed, if they were parents. And we actually had some non-parents do it too, because I think it's really, and it's just a really great philosophy, that Circle of Security parenting, around attachment and how you attach to people and how relationships are formed. So even with some of our younger participants, our 18, 19, 20-year-olds, if we wanted them to go through it just so they could learn a little bit about that perspective. But we thought about starting a family treatment court, and I, thought for years about it. I looked at the, practice standards, but we actually don't have the high enough numbers to create a separate court for family treatment court with everything that implies, only working with folks who've had their children removed or who are working with social services. But we do know that many of our participants, as like many of your participants, have children, and we need to address that. So what we ended up doing is we created a separate track. So we did end up having another court, but it's basically another track, and we call it our family focused wellness court. So it's on a separate day. And part of that is because our numbers were getting unwieldy. We had 20, 25 folks in our wellness court, and it's really hard to staff that many people in one day. And we wanted to split that apart. And we realized it was a really natural progression to split into a family focused court, and then what we call the regular adult wellness court, which are folks whose either children are older or they don't have children. And then we recently actually created a third track because we realized those 18 to 21, 22, 23-year-olds, they take up a lot of time in staffing, and we created a young adult court just for them, but that's a discussion for another day. So our adult focus, our family focused wellness court, as I said, so we focus on the relationship with the folks have with their children, creating that stronger bond, seeing what we can do to help create that bond, have the circle of security parenting class. And it's really just part of our adult trauma is that they don't have a good relationship with their children often. Sometimes there's a domestic violence issue that we have to deal with. So they might not be able to have a relationship with their children because of a order of protection or things like that. So, we need to work with them. If it's a battering issue, we will partner with a battering intervention program that we have in the area to get our folks through that. And one of the things, and your adult wellness court may also have this, is that not all of your participants are going to be members of the tribal court. So in Pojoaque, most of our participants are not Pueblo Pojoaque tribal members. They're members of surrounding Pueblos, they're Navajo. We've had, Bay Mills Indian community from northern Michigan in our northern New Mexico wellness court. So they're not always going to be members of the tribe that you work for, or that you have the healing to wellness court for. So for us, of course, that means that we don't have jurisdiction over those children. So that was another reason why we really couldn't do a family treatment court, because even if our participants had their children removed related to substance use disorder, we wouldn't necessarily be able to have them in our family treatment court, because that would require the other tribe to participate, which some do, and we do get referrals from other tribes. But it made more sense for us to just maintain the same adult wellness court, but having it be family focused and being very deliberate about making sure that we're checking in with folks about their kiddos, making sure we're checking in with how they're supporting their kids if they have a child support obligation, making sure that they're getting resources, and really just talking with them about their kids, which is really different than how we did it before. Because before we started thinking about being family focused, we didn't really talk so much about how, did you have time with your child this week? Were you able to, get with your mom and get some time with your kiddo, things like that. So it's really changed how we interact with people in our wellness court. And again, it's such a journey, and we just started by creating a family focused wellness court, just boom, we haven't done a long process of creating a new handbook or workbook or anything. We didn't get any new additional funding. The requirements are pretty much the same as in our adult criminal wellness court, our regular wellness court. But in that court, it's always, do the assessments and follow recommendations. And so for the family focused wellness court, the assessment and recommendations are going to be complete parenting class, work on relationship with child, things like that. So the case planning is different than in the family-focused wellness court. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Judge. Next. So I think Judge McGinnis really helped us sort of set the stage of thinking about what could you do, and starting to ask those questions like, why should you do it? And we're going to talk a lot more about that why, I think, and also how as we go through the presentation today. But one of the things that I want you to think about in the why is that we have an opportunity with any of the treatment courts that we manage to break the cycle. This is our opportunity to, we know that substance use and family violence and child neglect are often intergenerational. All of you know this, those of you who've been in your communities for a long time, it's really common that we see the same families come through, the same last names. And this is our chance, whether we're talking about a family treatment court where we've got that child welfare involvement, or a DWI or a veterans treatment court, to break that cycle, to really step in and say, we are working with this individual and their family for the next 12, 18, 24 months. How are we going to step in and serve the whole family and really think about meeting those needs? And we're going to talk more about this as we go, but those of you who are, now having heart palpitations saying, serve the whole family, like we don't even have the time, energy, or resources to serve hardly our target participants. But you don't do this alone. This is not something that you have to do alone. It is not something that you should do alone. And that's why we bring in the schools, we bring in public health, we bring in Indian health services. We bring in all of these partners to serve, because they are actually charged with serving each of these other parts of the family. So that's what we're going to talk about. And I really just kind of want you to think about, this is moving to family-centered practice is an opportunity to break that cycle. Next. We know this, that participants, they don't exist in isolation, that substance use disorder is a family disease. It affects all of the relationships in the family unit. It's, participants could be parents, they could be grandparents, spouses, children. We recover in community, we recover in our family and friend network. And so when we're thinking about supporting our participants to really get to that place of stable recovery, we have to treat the family, we have to heal those relationships, and we have to break that cycle. Next. So a little bit of just that research, thinking about if we're talking about the adult criminal participant, let's say, although some of you are working in juvenile healing to wellness, some in family healing to wellness. Think about what is happening in that household of that adult criminal participant. They have a substance use disorder and criminal justice involvement that has landed them in your healing to wellness court. Often that means that they have a moderate to severe, probably severe substance use disorder and really high-end kind of criminal involvement. So think about what that means for the family. Think about what that means for the children in that household. What kinds of adverse childhood experiences are those children experiencing as a result of that parent's involvement in substance use? Think about what happens when the child is separated from that parent because that parent is going to jail or prison, has been in the past, or when that child comes into child welfare. So what we know is that bonding is so important. Next, please. And we have that bonding, that attachment to that parent is very strong. And it is so damaged when there's all this chaos. And we have an opportunity to intervene in that chaos and work to heal that attachment. I love, Judge, that you were doing Circle of Security with all of with all of your folks, not just even those who were actively parenting. And that note that you said that it's such a piece of trauma for the parent to be separated from their children because of domestic violence, because of separation orders, because of some of those. And the parent themselves, when they're coming to us, that adult criminal participant likely had much of these kinds of adverse childhood experiences in their own lives. Go ahead, next, please. Judge Hirsch, who is a judge in Queens, New York, does this presentation with us sometimes at NADCP, and she has gotten to the point where she asks all of her adult criminal folks questions about their own childhood. Were they involved in foster care themselves? Were they separated? She gets those adverse childhood experiences and puts that into the record and really tries to understand how those adverse childhood experiences have affected the individual in front of her. Because what do we see? We see that being abused or neglected has increases huge increases in arrest as a juvenile, arrest as an adult, arrest for violent crime. So there's a really high likelihood that those adult criminal folks in front of us had some kind of child welfare or other kinds of abuse or neglect. Maybe that abuse or neglect was never even discovered or addressed. And that is that underlying trauma that has brought that participant to us. Next. Okay, so what are we going to do about this? One of the things is we just need to know who's out there and what kinds of family systems are we dealing with. So next. Go ahead, next. So we can't change what we can't count. We talk about data, we talk about maintaining our data electronically, right? In those management information systems and how important that is. But we need to start asking those questions. We need to know if those parents and if those individuals in front of us are parents. Are they actively parenting? Are they separated from their children by some separation order? Do they have grown children? We need to ask those questions so that we can start to address those needs. Next. So are you now, or can you start asking about other family relationships, not just who's in the household, but those non-custodial parents? Figure out, where are they? What is the quality of that relationship? That is something we're doing a presentation July 8 on stigma and shame. And what we hear from so many of these, particularly non-custodial parents, but also custodial parents, is that they have so much shame about their substance use, about their criminal justice involvement, about the fact that they have been separated from their children, that they are not able to be a good parent, that they are not able to provide for their children, all of those things. And that shame and that stigma is going to get in the way of that individual really engaging in treatment and their recovery. So really asking those questions so that we can start to unpack that and start to help them make amends, help them address those relationships. Make sure that you're asking questions about family structure. You may be better at that in your healing to wellness courts than a lot of our other treatment courts, but we all need to get a little bit better and understand those family systems. We need to think about how we get the entire family into treatment, and remembering that, you know, asking what is family to you? Who is your family? Because we've got family of birth, but then we have the family that we choose. And those, you know, often we may be estranged from our family of birth, and we need to address the harm that has come to that family of choice that has embraced us at other times. So we need to really ask those questions and ensure that our information systems, again, are tracking those family members. Next. With that, I want to kind of pass it over to you, Judge, to sort of talk about a little of this.
Yeah, thank you. So one thing, you know, as the judge, of course, I don't have a close relationship with the participants. You know, I generally see them once a week. I might run into them in the hallway sometimes when they're there to meet with folks or get tested for their UAs. So it's really important in staffing to pass that information up to the judge, you know, because I'm not always on top of asking those kinds of questions. And sometimes I'm surprised that somebody has a child. I didn't know they had a child because they're not the custodial parent. They don't bring it up in court. So it's really important to pass that information on to the judge and staffing so that the judge is able to have a more meaningful conversation with the participants. You know, and that's something I've really been trying to do much better myself. And Judge Garrow last year did a little talk on motivational interviewing, which was excellent. And I've been trying to do some motivational interviewing techniques when I'm talking with participants in court. And so, you know, but having those kinds of questions to ask of, you know, if I'm told, you know, the participant had time with his daughter this past weekend, then I know I can ask about that, but I'm not going to know that information unless the staff brings it up to me. But again, these are things that are, you know, not that hard to implement, just to make sure that, you know, the treatment provider is saying, you know, judge, you know, he's really struggling with his daughter, not being able to see his daughter, and that's really a trigger for him. You know, so those are things that we can discuss in court too, if the treatment provider thinks it's a good idea. You know, because, you know, of course, the studies show that the interaction with the judge is so important to participants. So when they have a judge who's, you know, being empathetic and knows about their family and knows that they're in a fight with their mom and their mom has custody of their kids, and for the judge, you know, to know that that's what's going on and to say, so, you know, did you get to see your daughter this month, or did you get to see your daughter this week, or, you know, how are things going with your mom, things like that. The participants really like that, and they're very positively, it affects them very positively, and I see that in our courthouse with our participants.
Next slide, please. All right, every individual who is a part of a family unit has his or her own unique needs. Many adult drug courts serve a higher percentage of men than family drug courts do. We should be aware of the unique needs our members have and offer services that provide the treatment and foundation they need for a life of recovery. That might mean when we're offering treatments. That might mean when we're having some flexibility for when parents or when our participants are able to provide for their urine analysis testing, and making sure that we're accommodating when school is taking place or when parents are needing to attend certain events. As we talk about that life of recovery, we really think of that through SAMHSA's 4 pillars of recovery: health, home, community, and purpose. These 4 pillars all center on family. Home is a safe environment, which will include other family members, maybe a partner or children or other extended family. Community, as many of us parents know, is oftentimes built on our own children's social circles and extended family. For men in particular, purpose is driven by one's ability to provide for his family. This is why it's so important, especially when working with men, that we make sure to try to accommodate schedules when it is possible. Sometimes the idea of going to residential treatment is really scary. And if we see that they're resistant to treatment, oftentimes our first instinct is to look to sanction or punish that parent for what they are or are not doing. We really need to begin to look at the why and understand that if there's context that has to do with extended family, some of those questions that Kirsten was talking about, better understanding family status, what's going on with the children, those other questions that Judge McGinnis was referencing, really having an understanding of contextually what is going on with that family so we're able to know the bigger picture of what is going on and really understanding the why behind certain behaviors. And then, of course, health is more holistic than one simple factor. It's more than just where they are in their recovery. Oftentimes, family health is important as well. As Kirsten talked about earlier in those generational cycles, we know that those parents with higher ACE scores are more likely to have children with higher ACE scores. And so sometimes those children might be having problematic behaviors. So not only do we have a parent who is new to recovery or a participant new to recovery, but their child is also going through a lot of unique challenges, and parents are experiencing those challenges right alongside and might be struggling to respond to those things. So we really need to understand the whole picture of what's going on with parents and able to help them continue to move toward that life of recovery. Next slide, please. So again, this key strategy focused on needs is about providing services that support family needs and the parent-child relationship. Next, please. So for those of you in the audience, probation workers, coordinators, treatment counselors, are you taking these things are you talking about these kind of things with your participants? Judges, when you are doing your reviews, when you're talking with participants, those 3 minutes of open-ended questions and discussion with your participants, are you asking about the issues related to the parent's family? Are you asking about how that's impacting their treatment, their urinalysis testing, their employment status? And if you're not, what are the things that you need from your team to be more comfortable with that? Judge McGinnis spoke about needing the team to speak up. What kind of things would you like to see your team discussing more? And are there certain questions that can be discussed during staffing? I know that one thing that I've seen certain courts do is they've added a statement every time. What is the status of parenting, or what's the family status? Things along those lines. But other questions like what we have on the screen right here are also important. What kind of assessments are being done? What kind of assessments are needed? Are we able to understand and discuss the trauma of families, other relationship issues? How are strengths identified and leveraged? Every individual has strengths, every family has strengths. How can we be aware of those and talk about them to be able to help families? Next slide, please.
Can I just say, as judge, it's great to get that information. And sometimes if I don't know where the participant is at with the trauma around their parenting, I'm afraid to ask those questions unless I have kind of an okay from the team, because I don't want to wade into something that's going to create more trauma, and I have certainly asked really stupid questions, and inappropriate questions because I didn't have the right information. Like I didn't know that their grandma had just passed away. And, so those are really important things to make sure that the judge knows, because otherwise if I don't know that it's okay to ask questions, getting that deeply into something, then I'm going to play it safe. But, in staffing, that's, we do talk about that. And, I say, so I'm going to ask him about this. And the treatment provider will say, yeah.
Great, thank you. So speaking of those family strengths and needs, the state of Montana worked with Children and Family Futures to develop a strengths and needs assessment or survey to be used in all of their treatment courts, really looking at that family-centered strengths and needs. what they learned once implemented is that family-focused needs were absolutely impacting their adults participants' capacity to engage in treatment and attain stable recovery. As you can see, over 50% of parents of the participants in those other types of treatment courts, not just the family treatment courts, were concerned about the well-being and social well-being of their children. More than 40%, 47% were concerned about medical issues or other physical challenges of their children, and concerned about children's behavior as well as significant others' mental health. And so we also have to talk about screening and assessment. How can we take a look at these pieces and really begin to think about how that might look in our healing to wellness courts? If in Montana, over 50% had these concerns, what do you think the concerns might be in your courts? Next slide, please. And then go ahead and click it a couple times, I think. So as we think about the idea of treatment, what can we do to help it be family-centered? Can we offer services to everyone in the family, not just the adult in our adult healing to wellness court, not just the juvenile in our juvenile healing to wellness court, but are we able to offer services that are particular to the parent, as well as services that support the child, other family members that might be involved in the family? And then are we able to offer services that affect the entire family? I think we're going to talk about a few of those examples in just a moment, but are we able to look at issues like what Judge was talking about earlier with the domestic violence? Are we able to offer something that's not just for the parent who is involved in that domestic violence, but for those that are impacted as well by it? Are we able to talk about parenting involvement? Are we able to talk about the parent-child relationship, attachment, offering services focused on reunification for those families that might also be moving forward with that process? As Judge McGinnis talked about earlier, some of the families that we might be working with might have certain cases in front of our jurisdiction and certain in front of other jurisdictions. And so how can we have a better understanding of what is going on in both cases, in both jurisdictions, and able to really help look at that family holistically and everything that they have going on? And then of course, family-centered treatment also has a community piece as well. It has impacts on our cost savings, tax base, increasing employment, reduced criminal recidivism, improving birth outcomes, reduced school problems, and other health costs. So when we look at family-centered treatment, the costs and the savings are huge. Next slide, please. So when we think about being family-centered, we oftentimes think about family treatment courts. And family treatment court best practice standards include a couple of standards that focus specifically on some of what we're talking about today. But also, if you look at the adult drug court best practice standards, standard 6 is focused on complementary treatment and social services. And so some of the things that they encourage and that are a part of being family-centered really are looking at all these different pieces on this slide, really looking at the parent-child service components, so addressing issues related to trauma, providing other community and auxiliary support, having parenting education like Circle of Security, as Judge was speaking about earlier, as well as other parenting educational opportunities, focusing on the parent-child relationship, really engaging with peer support, which we know is one of the most important things we can do to help participants, especially early in their recovery. Really looking at quality and frequent parenting time or visitation, and then other hearings, screenings, assessments, things that we can do to really have an understanding of what is going on with the individuals involved in our treatment courts. Judge McGinnis, is there anything that you'd like to tell us about any of these pieces and how you've seen it utilized in your healing to wellness court?
Yeah, so if the person is a Pewaukee tribal member, then we're able to get them services within Pewaukee with our family and children services. But we do get referrals from other tribal courts where the children have been removed from the custody. And so we try to work with those other tribal courts to get services and to make sure that they understand what our participant is doing as far as improving their substance use disorder, because we'll be focused on their trauma and substance use disorder. So they'll be doing our trauma treatment, meeting with our trauma specialists, and doing our substance use disorder plans. So it's hard, and this is definitely where we're kind of developing our programs much. We're focused on trying to get more of this built into our programs, but it's as we're all learning, we don't have to do this ourselves, as Kirsten said earlier, that there are usually community partners in the area. And the other thing to remember that I sometimes didn't remember, especially early in my being a judge for a Pueblo, is that tribal children are state citizens also. So don't hesitate to look for state services, because I think I got a little too focused on getting tribal services and tribal community, but the state has a lot more resources, especially in really difficult cases. So we were able to get some children into treatment foster care if that was the level of services that was needed, or we had the multidisciplinary teams were able to come in, and they, fortunately our state children and family youth department do understand that tribal citizens are state citizens also. So they, are very in favor of coming in and giving services where needed on tribal, with our, of course, being invited in. So working with our tribal family and children services and partnering for the best interests of the state citizens and the tribal citizens. Thanks.
Thanks, Judge McGinnis. Next slide, please. So we just wanted to take a look at some parenting programs that are specific to families affected by substance use disorders. Circle of Security, as Judge McGinnis spoke about earlier, is a great attachment-based parenting curriculum that is evidence-based and is just a great one. I think that I've seen great success with that. Celebrating Families is another one of my favorites. That really is it's a class that's for the entire family, starting with a family meal and then breaking out into age-specific groups, and then coming back together for a discussion around, based on the common topic that everyone spoke about. A couple of other ones that are great here are Strengthening Families, and then a nurturing program there as well. And so we have a couple of resources as well, and we are going to have these slides available for you that have some resources for other places to look for parenting curriculum that could be applicable to your families that you are working with. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we know is that treatment during pregnancy is so important. We know that there is an opening at that time for moms and for dads to potentially become more open to the idea of substance use disorder treatment and getting the help that they need. So do you have any sort of way to keep in mind when somebody might become pregnant? Do you know when the fathers, the dads, the men that are in your Healing to Wellness courts might be in relationships where they need to have conversations about these possibilities? It is critical that we help moms access prenatal care, including medication for addiction treatment, or MAT, when appropriate. Especially if we have pregnant moms using opioids, she must be assessed for potential medication for opioid use disorder medical support. Anything that we can do to help provide a safe outcome for children. And as we know, the first 6 weeks, moms might not know that they are pregnant during that time. And so it is so important, because we know that those early days are vital to positive outcomes towards healthy children. And as we talk about these generational cycles that we're looking to end, these multi-generational cycles, we know that at pregnancy, especially early in pregnancy, it is vital to get them the support and care that they need. Kirsten, is there anything else that you'd like to add about that?
Yeah, I think just really having those conversations. One of the things that we also can talk about is, asking about family planning. Even if your participant is a guy, having that conversation and bringing his partner or partners into that conversation around family planning. And then just really recognizing that often our partners will have been using together, and really needing to look at expanding who we're treating to those partners, so that should the woman in that relationship become pregnant, that we can really try to get a great birth outcome. And building that relationship so that we will find out. I mean, how often do we find out way down the line that this person's partner is pregnant? And so we really want to, kind of open that conversation so that they're open to talking with us about that, and we can help get those prenatal resources together. And if we need to, a plan of safe care put in place for that mom. Thanks, yeah.
Great, thank you, Kirsten. Next slide, please.
I just wanted to touch on oh, go ahead, Will.
No, go ahead, Judge.
I was just, it's such a difficult, it's working with women who are using substances and are pregnant is really difficult. And sometimes we have great success. We get the person onto Subutex, the medicine for addiction treatment. And we've had a, really healthy baby born recently. But, we also have pregnant women who are refusing to participate in services and are continuing to use. And so, that comes into the, how coercive can we get? And, our philosophy in Pwake is we can't really get that coercive with folks. It's, I've heard of other courts that have put pregnant women in jail for continuing to use, and that's definitely not our philosophy. But it's a huge discussion. And it's so painful to see people continuing to use and refusing services while they're pregnant, knowing the potential harm being done to the child. But again, when you're trying to come from a trauma-informed perspective, you're just trying to get the woman to come in. And of course, she is going to feel terrible about using, even if she's saying she doesn't. And so you do want to make sure you're being very trauma-informed when you're dealing with folks who are pregnant, and thanking them for coming in, and and even if they come in 2 days late, just accepting them, and not, it's really hard, and to not get angry with people who aren't doing the best they can do for their fetus. But coercive treatment or coercive or incarceration even isn't going to be the answer to that. But there's no good answers when somebody's not coming into services. But it's traumatic for the team, and it's traumatic for the family, and for the community. And so I just wanted to bring that up, that it's a difficult question. There's no good answers.
And there is so much shame and stigma around substance use and pregnancy. And just as you said, Judge, like, you want to be so angry with them, and because you're scared for her, you're scared for that child. But approaching with empathy and outreach and understanding is the way to get her to engage instead of run away.
That's exactly right. And while it is a scary time, it's also a possibility to provide an opportunity for that mom to become motivated, or for that dad to become motivated. And so I think, Judge McGinnis, you spoke earlier about Judge Garreau's motivational interview training. And this is a great opportunity for all the providers, the judge, the substance use disorder treatment, and maybe even partnerships with the local hospital or prenatal care center, to really work together and create partnerships, to really both create those plans of safe care, and then also create those partnerships that are able to hopefully have those best outcomes that we can, for both the parents as well as for those children. And so something else that we just wanted to make sure to highlight in this section, kind of shifting gears a little bit from prenatal care, is when working with juveniles in a juvenile healing to wellness court. We know that the substance use disorder may or may not be particular to the participant in your court, but we know that there are very unique challenges that the entire family is going through as that juvenile is in front of you. And so what kind of supports can we do? What kind of engagement can we have with the entire family to really provide those best outcomes for both that juvenile, that youth, as well as the entire family? And are there parenting classes that we can look at that are specific to those teenage years or to the age group that we're looking at? And what are the different aspects of support that we're able to provide for that entire family? Next slide, please. And then I think we're just going to kick it over to Judge McGinnis, and anything that you want to talk about in regards to any of the unique needs that participants have as family members.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it is hard. I mean, when people first come into wellness court, they don't have a lot of trust with the staff, you know, because with an adult criminal court, of course, they've come in through usually being in jail because they've been arrested for, in our court, it's usually driving while intoxicated. And the second most is usually domestic violence. So they're coming into court and it's, you know, it's usually adversarial. And it just takes a while to get trust. And so it may be even a month before you can start talking about family and bringing in other systems, because it's going to take folks a while to really understand that you're not there to punish them, that you're really there to help them with their substance use disorder and figure out what's best for them. And a lot of times at the beginning, they're only in it because they want to get their case dismissed. You know, that's, you know, for us, it's a post-plea court, so they have to come in and plead guilty or no contest, but we do a deferred conviction. So if they successfully complete, then everything gets dismissed, including their fines and costs. So they're like, yeah, I'll take that. You know, but so for the first month, they're doing their assessment. We're making sure they're high risk, high needs. We're making sure that they, you know, they have their SASE, so they get their substance use disorder treatment plan. And, you know, and of course, in the first month, you know, if they're able to create some sort of, put a few days together of not using, then they're starting to think a little more clearly. But of course, we know that the folks coming in, and I give talks about this all the time about the brain and how it's developing and how it's healing, but it takes a long time to heal. So even in the first 3 months, if they're able to maintain some level of abstinence, you know, their brain's healing, but it takes a while for them to be able to get into the concept. So until we get them, figure out their housing, you know, until we, you know, see if they have a way of getting food, you know, if they have medical needs, you know, there's all these, you know, I guess what Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know, if we don't get there, if they have a toothache that is killing them, you know, talking to them about, you know, whether they're paying child support isn't going to be helpful. So, you know, you need to get their basic needs taken care of, so that they can then start developing their higher level of needs, higher level of desires around family. And so, you know, some people come in and they're already very, you know, they have a stable house, they have a job, you know, so we can start working with them on that stuff right away. And other folks are coming in and they're homeless, they're couch surfing, their medical needs aren't taken care of. You know, we have lots of folks who have hepatitis, undiagnosed, you know, things like that, you know, severe medical issues, and wanting to have more time with their children and get a job and get a house. But, you know, you have to take things step by step. People have to be ready to have positive interactions with their family, you know, before we can really start pushing that. And, you know, so something that was said earlier around like going to residential treatment, you know, so if we try to get people into at least 90-day residential treatment if they're going to go. And it's hard to convince a young parent to be away from their kids for 3 months or 6 months or whatever. You know, but again, that's about getting the trust of the team that we're not, that investing that 6 months now is going to pay off huge benefits, because they're going to come back and they're going to be stable and be able to interact with their children and their family in more positive ways, and have some level of stable sobriety. You know, in our court, we, you know, I definitely used to, when I first started being a judge, I would order people into residential treatment. I didn't have a good understanding around that people actually needed to have voluntary services. I do still order it, but there actually isn't any consequence if they don't go into residential treatment, because I think having the nudge of the judge, you know, it's like the nudge of the judge does a lot for getting people into services, but substance use disorder services really need to be voluntary. And my team has really taught me a lot about that you can't coerce somebody into residential treatment. I mean, I can order them, and that is coercive in a sense, but that, you know, but even if they're saying they don't want to go and they're not ready and they're not going to do it, if they're ordered to the judge and they go, a lot of times, you know, they do find out that they are ready and that they are willing to do it. But it's not like I'm going to put them in jail if they don't go, but they don't really know that, of course. But if they've been around the community, they know that I'm not going to put them in jail for not doing, going to residential. So, you know, there's a lot of moving parts with all of our participants, as we know. And I think, you know, bringing in their family and their children, and acknowledging that that's a huge part of their lives is a big shift for a lot of adult criminal courts, because we're really focused on the criminogenic. Like, we don't want them to commit another crime, and that, you know, that's the purpose, or the initial purpose, of adult wellness courts, adult criminal wellness courts. But creating that connection with their family and the connection with their children, and the hope that they're going to continue to be able to have that connection, is going to work on those criminogenic needs, and will decrease recidivism, because they're going to have a lot more to lose, because they're going to be connected. You know, we had a participant recently who, you know, has been in and out of jail, in and out of the system, you know, but he has so much pain around not being connected with his children, and that, you know, he's about to graduate, and he's really feeling positive about, you know, being able to be connected with his children, because he's never completed a program like this before. But I think, and he certainly didn't, you know, it wasn't easy for him to get to the point that he's at now. But he certainly had a lot of headbutting, me and him, you know, at the beginning. And so, you know, but everybody, all of you who are Healing to Wellness Court staff and have seen these amazing transformations, and, you know, and bringing in the kiddos is really, definitely adds to that feeling that we are creating these, that, you know, of course, the participants are doing all the hard work, but we're creating a space for our participants, and a structure and a scaffolding for our participants to be able to make the connections and create that, the recovery capital that is necessary to maintain the sobriety. You know, the day after they're graduating from wellness court, you know, if they want to drink themselves at their house, as long as they're not committing a crime, you know, that's not a crime. But we want to create the place where they're not going to do that, you know, that it's beyond, we just don't want them to commit another crime. You know, we've had older folks who are, you know, we had one person in their 80s who was in our court, and, you know, we just told him, drinking at home okay, drinking and driving not okay, you know. So that, you know, and getting him to that point was, you know, a huge, you know, victory, because we wanted the community to be safe. But, you know, for most people, we want them to maintain their stable sobriety, whether or not they're committing crimes after they leave us. We don't want them to make crimes, of course, but we also don't want them to lose their sobriety, because that really impacts their ability to have connections with the community, connections with the spiritual community, connections with their family, and, you know, really break that cycle that Kirsten and Will were talking about earlier.
And Judge, I think you made many great points, but one of the things that I think you were saying was really paying attention to those stages of change and working with folks from where they are, and they may not quite be ready to accept that they need to move into residential. And Will talked about what, you know, some of those challenges may be that parent is afraid of abandoning their families and leaving their jobs and not being able to help, to pay for what the family needs because they're not working. But when you're thinking about, running up against that, those barriers for residential or whatever that is, maybe sometimes people might be more willing to engage in other kinds of services. So maybe they want to start a parenting class, for instance, and then that is going to give them the insight, or circle of security, or parent-child interaction therapy, or any of those kinds of things that will give that individual some insight into why they need to go into residential. And then they're going to work with you instead of against you on that. Will, I'm going to pass it back to you.
All right, great, thank you. We've got a question about how some healing to wellness courts are working with IHS. So Judge McGinnis, I don't know if you have any experience or knowledge of that, but I wanted to give you that opportunity to talk about that. And if any of the people watching today, if anybody is able to share any information and can send that in the chat to all panelists and attendees, we would love to hear some of those examples.
So for us, as far as I know, and of course the treatment providers would know more about this, we use IHS a lot for psychiatric care to get folks assessed. We do have a mental health counselor who does the assessment for mental health counseling, but if somebody might have a higher level of psychiatric need, that's usually we send them to IHS, or we actually have somebody else come in for telemedicine to do, another psychiatrist to evaluate them, see whether medication or something else might be more appropriate for them. And I'm not talking about medicine for addiction treatment, but medicine for a mental health issue other than substance use disorder. We haven't had a lot of luck working with IHS as far as medicine for addiction treatment, but luckily Northern New Mexico does have and is doing a much better job of having MAT providers that we're able to access for folks who have opioid use disorder. And also, and we do use IHS to get naltrexone, Vivitrol for folks. We mostly use that for people, or think about it for people with alcohol use disorder. That seems to be where it's most effective. We haven't had luck with people with opioid use disorder getting on Vivitrol. It's a different mechanism, and it's a different presentation to talk about how MAT works and on the different systems, but we do work with IHS for getting some of the MAT for our folks.
I think you could also, and I don't know who does developmental screenings. Is that IHS, or is that when we kick folks back out to the state services, those developmental services?
Yeah, we've mostly used the state for that. We don't have a good handle on getting assessments for fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. And I don't know, I think that's probably just our fault of not really pursuing that strongly. And I think IHS is a leader in that area.
So that would be really a spot to ask those questions. I mean, somebody asked, how do you work with IHS? That's reaching out and asking them, this is what we've got, what can you do for us? Which kind of gets us to the next section, Will.
Absolutely. Next slide, please. So the next step really is looking at our networks. And so the great thing about healing to wellness courts is that not everything is on the judge. Thank goodness, because it's way too much for any one person or one agency to do. These healing to wellness courts truly are collaborative with all the different partners that we have. Next slide, please. And again. So we really need to take a look at who all could also offer these services. So it's not simply asking what more can our current partners do, though there might be opportunities for that. We need to look at other potential partners and who might be willing to come to the table in order to provide for some of these needs. If there are state partners that are offering some of those developmental assessments that we were talking about, or maybe it's getting a better understanding of what IHS can offer. your participants as well as their families. Inviting them in, having that conversation, really using the judge as the convener of partners to be able to bring people to the table to discuss what is needed. And we kind of talked about, the 10,000 things that were needed in our previous section on need. And so identifying what are the things that we're able to offer and being realistic. We know that we can't do everything that we've talked about throughout this presentation, but we need to take baby steps to move forward and begin to offer the best services that we can to the entire family to best serve the participant in front of us in our Healing to Wellness Court. So what are the current service gaps that we have? Who are our clientele, and how are we able to offer them the services that they best need? Next, please. So again, some of the helpful questions that we can be asking ourselves: what other services can we refer people to, and what services do we have that are connected to children? Are there other family serving agencies that can be on our collaborative team, or that maybe can be involved in different levels of our governance structure? What other resources and agencies can mobilize to create connections with? Maybe if there is a family Healing to Wellness Court in our jurisdiction, are we able to create partnerships or linkages? Judge McGinnis talked about having those different tracks that maybe meet on a different day that a lot of the same team members are a part of, but maybe there's an additional team member or two that is offering services unique to that population. What other formal relationship information sharing protocols can we put in place in order to meet those unique needs? So I think next slide, and then we'll pass it back over to Judge McGinnis about those the community mapping or networking.
Yeah, so we did a community mapping exercise when we first were training with Carolyn Harden to develop our wellness court. And, when you have a bunch of folks from the community, you can think of a lot of things in your community that are there that you wouldn't have known about, but somebody else knew about this one program that does this. And recently there was even a residential treatment program not that far from us for men and women that I hadn't heard of. And it shocks me that there's resources out there. So it's important to not just do community mapping, but to continue to update your resources. And you can do this yourself, but there's also lots of resources to help, especially with established wellness courts, funding. Or we worked with the University of New Mexico. It's actually the Sentencing Commission. For some reason, part of what they do is these kinds of community maps, and it's probably because they have expertise from folks who are coming out on probation and getting services and needing services. So we partnered with the University of New Mexico, and they came up and did a lot of interviews in the community to create an actual map, and they actually made a map, using Google Maps or something, so that we could see where everything was. So again, this is not something you necessarily have to do yourself, because we're all completely overwhelmed with everything we have to do. Thinking about creating a new track even is exhausting. Thinking about creating a whole new philosophy of your court is exhausting. And so, like Kirsten said at the beginning, it's baby steps. Even if you haven't been asking about children, ask about children. If you haven't been asking about child support, ask about child support. Just start, and then it kind of snowballs because it becomes a natural part of your court. And as I said, I'm not trying to pretend that Poake is the be all and end all of the family focused court. We're very much in the process. So, I'm hesitant even to be on this call, but it's a process that we're all going through, and we're all improving. And I think Judge Garrow said something funny yesterday about being trained back in 2000, and that the things that she was told to do then are things she's told not to do now. So, that's so true. And a lot of it is innovation, so, you have to think about what works for your community, and we have certainly done things that were like, that's not worthwhile, or that doesn't help, or people hate that. And, so sometimes you have to try something and see, what works and what doesn't. And And the more you start into this area, you'll see our participants responding in really positive ways, because of course people love their family and they want to talk about their family. And rather than having everything so siloed for them, you know, because they're in adult criminal court, so they're going to talk about their criminal crap, you know, but when you bring in their family, they're like, oh, this isn't just about me being a bad person or being a criminal. This is about how I relate to my family too.
Thanks. Next slide. So we've had a couple of questions. I think we've been trying to answer them, but as we go through these next couple of slides, please drop in other questions. And if we can't answer them in the next 8 minutes, we will also get back to you with those answers as much as we can. Next slide, please. So the judge said it, you know, like just walking away. And I guess that's what I would ask you to do in the chat now is drop in something that you plan to do. How are you going to make those first steps to be more family centered? Is it just ask, you know, is it asking different questions? Is it adding something to your intake form? Is it, you know, actually you're collecting all this information, but you've never thought to give it to the judge? What is it that you can do? So drop into our chat things that you want to try, what you're going to do. You know, it's, when Judge Garrow said that yesterday, I've been in this field for a long time. I started with juvenile and family treatment courts in 2000. So just at the beginning when we were just starting out these treatment courts. And then eventually moved into overseeing all of North Carolina's juvenile, family, adult, criminal, all of those treatment courts for 12 years. And even with my own background, coming from a family systems background in working with our adult criminal treatment courts, our veterans courts, our mental health courts, our DWI courts, I wasn't necessarily making that shift to be more family centered. And even our family treatment courts looked like adult drug courts that just had a child welfare case. So it's that whole, when you know better, do better. And that's all we're asking, like just making those next small shifts in practice to really start to break that cycle. And also, I think that as you make those shifts, and I don't know, Judge McGinnis, if you've had any, like any sort of anecdotes to share, but when we start talking with our participants about them as whole beings, you know, those of you who are parents out there, I don't know about you, maybe I had a hard time of it, but parenting is hard. Like parenting is the most difficult, most important thing I think any of us will ever do. And most of us are ill prepared to do it. You know, you've got to go to a driving class to get a driver's license, but anybody can have a child and have no education, no support for that. So parenting is hard. And so I don't know if, as you made that shift, Judge, have you seen changes in how people engaged with their recovery, how they engaged with treatment, how they engaged with all of you as you, like when we started treating them as whole beings? Because parenting, you know, if we're a parent, that's how we see ourselves.
Yeah, and I think, you know, like I was saying, you know, when the judge asks about their daughter, their time with their daughter, it creates more empathy, you know, from the judge, and also that they know that we know that they have this other thing going on in their lives. And so I just think it creates more real interactions. And I think it's really hard for me, because I know the treatment providers, probation officers, they sit down and talk at length with the participants. And I saw in the chat that people are going to think about giving more information to the judge. And I think that's really key for me and key for the whole point of having the wellness court hearings. And sometimes it's hard for me to even maintain 3 minutes and I usually try to do more than 3 minutes, but sometimes it's hard to have even that long of a talk with some folks. So the more information you give the judge, then they will have the ability to ask questions, about something that happened that week with the person. And we have something in our weekly sheet, questions to ask the judge. And, sometimes it's blank. So it's like, questions the judge should ask the participant. So, so that our folks can put that into that part of our weekly case review, so that the judge is cued on something important that happened that week for the person. And the other thing that with parents and even with everybody, and we talked about that, of course, we're, 13 months into COVID, and we've been using Zoom wellness court hearings for a little bit, maybe about a year. We didn't do it right away, but then we switched over to it. But maintaining that and understanding that somebody with a newborn baby isn't really gonna have the energy, the ability, the time to drive down to court. And of course, some reservations are huge and court is an hour away from some people. And we have some participants who don't live on the reservation. So being understanding and being flexible, and people are talking about using Zoom or being able to Zoom in as an incentive, which I think is a great idea. As long as, if somebody's not doing well, they're not checking in, they're not, then we want to see them. But I think understanding that people have lives and have jobs. We have a lot of people who Zoom in now on their break at a job, which is, helpful, because then they don't have to figure out how to get Tuesday afternoons off if they can Zoom in on their break. So I think it's really thinking about ways to be more flexible. And I think with COVID, we've all learned to be more flexible. And we've all learned that, Zooming in doesn't mean that people are using, they're actually doing well, even with COVID. And of course, we verify that with drug testing still, but, parents especially are going to have times where they can't come because their kiddos are there, especially this year when a lot of them had kids at home where they were at school and trying to be the teacher. So, we've learned a lot about being flexible, and that it's okay, that we can, again, meet people where they're at. And sometimes where they're at is there's no way they're going to be able to come to court, and just being able to understand that and not have that be a sanction, but just being able to understand. And of course, some people will try to take advantage of it. So you have to, do it case by case. And, but, we all know how to do that already.
Thanks, Judge. This is a great resource that Children and Family Futures developed with National Drug Court Institute. It is granted, it's adult criminal, but I think there's some nice kind of takeaways that if we didn't give you enough to think about today, taking a look at this and sort of lessons learned from these 3 adult drug courts that really tried to make that shift to family-centered practice. And with that, I thank all of you. I thank you, Judge McGinnis and Will, and we thank Tribal Law and Policy Institute.
Thank you. Once again, thank you for attending today's family track workshop entitled How Your Healing to Wellness Court is a Family-Focused Court, and You May Not Even Know It, How to Improve Recovery Outcomes for the Entire Family. Want to thank again the Honorable Judge Kim McGinnis, Will Blakely, and Kirsten Freskin for joining us today. Marlon now has some evaluation information for you. Marlon?